Do you remember the forgotten side dishes that quietly left the family table? These side dishes once filled everyday meals with warmth, thrift, and a sense of togetherness that families counted on. But when the food disappeared, what else faded from the table with it? Scalloped corn was one of those sides that turned a humble ingredient into something that felt special enough for Sunday supper. Families mixed creamed corn with cracker crumbs, milk, and eggs, then baked it until golden and set. The dish had a comforting richness without needing much meat or expensive additions, which made it perfect for the mid-century family table. It showed up often at church potlucks, reunions, and holidays because it could be stretched to feed many mouths with very little cost. Children liked the sweetness of the corn, while adults appreciated the filling texture that helped round out bigger meals. Even though casseroles became more elaborate in later decades, scalloped corn kept its place for a long time because it was simple and reliable. The flavor was mild, the ingredients inexpensive, and the preparation easy, which was all people wanted when feeding large families. Though it has largely vanished today, scalloped corn was once one of the most dependable and beloved sides across American dining tables. Ambrosia salad was a dish that carried with it the unmistakable mark of church basements and southern tables. Made from canned fruit cocktail, shredded coconut, and a generous handful of marshmallows, it was less a salad and more a sweet, creamy treat disguised as a side dish. It often appeared at potlucks, picnics, and Sunday gatherings where it sat proudly in glass bowls that showed off its bright colors. For many families, ambrosia was a symbol of hospitality, a way to offer something sweet, even when dessert was not planned. The canned fruit made it affordable and available year-round, while the marshmallows made it especially popular with children. It was refreshing, easy to prepare, and flexible enough to include extra touches like whipped cream or nuts if the pantry allowed. Over time, its sugary character fell out of favor as tastes moved toward healthier or more modern sides. Still, ambrosia salad once defined togetherness, turning even the simplest meal into something worth remembering. Jell-O vegetable salad was a creation that reflected both creativity and mid-century pride in convenience foods. Housewives would suspend peas, carrots, celery, or even olives inside brightly colored gelatin molds, often flavored with lime or lemon. These molds were carefully unmolded onto plates, sometimes garnished with lettuce to make them look more formal. They were a display piece as much as a side dish, reflecting how gelatin symbolized modern cooking in the 1960s. For children, it was often confusing to see vegetables trapped in wobbly desserts, but for adults, it represented resourcefulness and style. Recipes appeared in magazines and community cookbooks, encouraging homemakers to experiment with colors and textures. At potlucks, these shimmering molds stood tall on tables, admired as much for their appearance as their taste. Over time, the trend faded as people grew weary of the odd flavor pairings. Yet for a period, Jell-O vegetable salads were not just food but conversation starters at American family tables. Succotash was one of the most enduring side dishes to come out of the Depression years, making use of ingredients that were cheap, plentiful, and filling. It combined corn and lima beans, simmered together in butter or drippings to create a simple but hearty dish. Many households kept canned corn and beans on hand, so succotash required little planning and could be pulled together quickly. It was both nutritious and practical, stretching small amounts of vegetables into something substantial enough to serve alongside meat or bread. Children might not have loved lima beans, but they ate succotash because it was always there, dependable and filling. The dish carried over into the 1940s and 1950s, often appearing at holiday tables alongside turkey or chicken. In some regions, variations added cream or peppers to give it more depth. By the late 20th century, succotash slipped from popularity, but for decades it was a comfort food that reminded families of resilience and thrift during leaner times. Pineapple and cheese salad might sound strange to modern ears, but it was once a beloved mid-century favorite. A canned pineapple ring would be laid on a bed of lettuce, topped with a slice of sharp cheddar cheese, and finished with a dollop of mayonnaise. The combination of sweet, salty, and creamy flavors made it memorable, even if unusual. It was quick to prepare, colorful on the plate, and affordable since canned pineapple had become widely available by then. Children liked the sweetness of the fruit, while adults valued the contrast of cheese and tangy dressing. This dish often appeared at luncheons, bridge parties, and holiday tables, offering something that looked cheerful without requiring much effort. It reflected a time when canned goods were celebrated as modern conveniences that brought exotic tastes into ordinary kitchens. Though it has nearly vanished from menus today, pineapple and cheese salad once brightened countless tables, proving that simplicity and novelty could live side by side in one dish. Cabbage slaw with vinegar dressing was the tangy counterpart to the creamy coleslaws that would later dominate family tables. It relied on shredded cabbage, onions, and sometimes peppers, tossed with vinegar, sugar, and a touch of oil. The result was a crisp, refreshing side dish that paired perfectly with meats, especially barbecue or fried chicken. Families appreciated how inexpensive it was, since cabbage was cheap, easy to grow, and stored well. Vinegar-based dressings also kept the slaw longer than creamier alternatives, which made it practical for picnics, potlucks, and outdoor gatherings. It carried a sharper flavor that cut through rich main dishes, balancing plates with brightness and crunch. Children might have preferred creamier versions, but vinegar slaw was a staple across many regions before mayonnaise-based salads took over. Its presence at community gatherings and dinner tables showed how thrift and tradition guided mid-century cooking. Though overshadowed today, cabbage slaw with vinegar dressing was once the go-to side dish that stood as a refreshing, reliable classic. Corn pudding was a baked custard that blended corn, eggs, and milk into a warm, comforting dish. Served most often during holidays, it became a tradition at Thanksgiving and Christmas tables across the country. The sweetness of the corn balanced the richness of the custard, creating something that felt both hearty and indulgent. Families looked forward to it because it transformed an ordinary pantry staple into something that felt festive. It was easy to make in large quantities, which made it practical for gatherings. Recipes varied from family to family, with some adding sugar for a dessert-like quality and others keeping it savory with butter and salt. The dish carried a homey nostalgia that tied generations together, as many children grew up watching it come out of the oven golden brown. While it has faded from modern meals, corn pudding was once a holiday highlight that brought warmth and sweetness to tables during the 1940s and 1950s, becoming a memory wrapped in tradition. Molded cranberry salad was one of those gelatin creations that became linked to Thanksgiving and Christmas meals. Cranberries, often canned, were mixed with nuts, citrus, and sometimes celery, then set in a bright red gelatin mold. It was eye-catching, colorful, and perfectly in step with the mid-century love of molded salads. Housewives served it as a side dish that walked the line between savory and sweet, complementing turkey and stuffing with its tart bite. Children liked the wobbling texture and sweetness, while adults valued the festive presentation it brought to the table. The dish reflected how important appearance had become in family meals, where even side dishes were expected to impress guests. Molded cranberry salad carried a celebratory quality, marking holidays with something more decorative than practical. Though it has almost entirely disappeared from modern feasts, it was once an expected presence at holiday dinners, a symbol of how food and tradition worked hand in hand to create family memories. Creamed spinach was a dish that once held a secure place both at home and in steakhouses. Fresh or frozen spinach was cooked down, then combined with butter, cream, and a hint of nutmeg to create a rich, velvety side. It paired beautifully with roasts and steaks, making it a favorite in both home kitchens and restaurants. Families appreciated its nutritional value as well as its comforting taste, which softened the bitterness of spinach. It was one way to get children to eat their greens, dressed up with enough creaminess to feel indulgent. In steakhouses, creamed spinach was considered essential, often appearing alongside baked potatoes as the classic pairing for a hearty dinner. Though lighter vegetable dishes eventually replaced it, creamed spinach had a long run as a dependable, beloved side. Today, it has nearly disappeared from everyday family meals, but it remains a reminder of a time when richness and comfort were valued at the dinner table as much as thrift. Harvard beets were a sweet and sour side dish that reflected the Midwestern love of hearty, simple foods. Beets were simmered in vinegar, sugar, and butter until tender, then thickened into a glossy sauce. The balance of tangy and sweet flavors made them stand out among plainer vegetables. They were inexpensive, easy to prepare, and filling, which made them a regular presence at supper tables. Housewives often turned to this recipe when other vegetables were scarce, since beets stored well and were available throughout the year. Children sometimes resisted the strong flavor, but adults valued their versatility and nutrition. The dish was particularly popular in Midwestern kitchens, where families saw it as both practical and comforting. Over time, tastes shifted, and beets themselves became less common on American tables, leaving Harvard beets to fade into memory. For much of the 20th century, however, they were a staple side dish that represented the balance of thrift, flavor, and tradition in American cooking. Three-bean salad was once a guaranteed sight at picnics and reunions, its bright colors and tangy flavor standing out among heavier dishes. The mix of green beans, wax beans, and kidney beans marinated in a vinegar dressing made it both refreshing and economical. Housewives loved how simple it was to prepare, since all it required was canned beans, vinegar, sugar, and oil, plus maybe a few onions if available. The salad could be made in advance, stored in the refrigerator, and brought out ready to serve, which made it perfect for busy families. Its sweet and sour tang cut through greasy barbecue or fried chicken, making it practical as well as tasty. Children sometimes picked around the beans, but most adults welcomed it as a lighter dish among calorie-heavy meals. Over time, creamy potato salads and coleslaws began to replace it, pushing three-bean salad out of favor. Once a star of the picnic table, it is now rarely made at all, leaving behind memories of simpler gatherings where vinegar and sugar worked small miracles in everyday cooking. Fried apples were once a familiar side dish in Southern homes, where fruit was often treated as part of the main meal rather than dessert. Sliced apples were sautéed in butter and sprinkled with sugar, cooked until tender and golden. The dish had a natural sweetness that made it popular with children, while still pairing well with savory foods like pork chops or biscuits. Housewives liked fried apples because they required no special equipment, just a skillet and whatever fruit was on hand. They worked especially well in autumn when orchards provided more apples than families could eat fresh. Leftover apples nearing spoilage could also be saved from waste by frying them, which fit the thrifty mentality of the time. The scent of apples cooking in butter filled kitchens with warmth and comfort, becoming part of many families' food memories. Although fried apples have mostly vanished from modern dinners, they remain one of those sides that defined regional tradition, a reminder of when practicality and sweetness blended seamlessly on the dinner table. Potato puffs made thrifty use of leftover mashed potatoes, turning them into something crisp and golden that families looked forward to. Housewives mixed mashed potatoes with eggs, flour, and seasonings, shaping small patties that were fried until light and fluffy. The result was a side dish that stretched yesterday's dinner into something new and satisfying. Children loved the crunchy exterior and soft interior, which made them more exciting than plain mashed potatoes. Potato puffs fit well into a culture that wasted nothing, transforming scraps into a dish worth celebrating. They were often served at family suppers or church gatherings where plates of these little bites disappeared quickly. Some recipes added cheese, onions, or herbs when available, but the basic version remained a staple because of its simplicity. Over time, boxed potato mixes and convenience foods replaced the ritual of making them at home. While rarely seen today, potato puffs once symbolized resourcefulness, proving that even the humblest leftovers could be transformed into a comforting family favorite without spending much at all. Baked macaroni and tomatoes was a hearty casserole that stood proudly on dinner tables before creamy macaroni and cheese became the standard. It combined pasta with stewed or canned tomatoes, seasoned with onions, salt, and pepper, then baked until the flavors melded together. Families appreciated its affordability since both macaroni and canned tomatoes were inexpensive staples available throughout the year. The dish was filling and could easily serve as either a side or a main meal when money was tight. Housewives liked how flexible it was, often adding bits of bacon, cheese, or leftover vegetables when available. Children enjoyed the tangy tomato flavor, which was far more exciting than plain noodles. It was especially common in the 1940s and 1950s, when pantry cooking shaped much of American dining. Though baked macaroni and tomatoes has largely vanished from modern meals, it remains a snapshot of mid-century kitchens, where practicality ruled and flavor was drawn from whatever ingredients could be stretched farthest. For many families, it was comfort food at its most frugal and dependable. Rice pudding once had a different place at the table than it does today, often served as a side dish alongside meat rather than just a dessert. Made with rice, milk, sugar, and eggs, it was baked until soft and creamy, sometimes flavored with cinnamon or raisins. Its sweetness was mild enough that it could pair with savory foods, acting more like a filler than a treat. Housewives appreciated how it made use of leftover rice, ensuring nothing was wasted. The dish was inexpensive, warm, and satisfying, which made it popular during cold months. Children often loved the creamy texture and gentle flavor, while adults valued it as a practical way to stretch meals further. Over time, rice pudding shifted firmly into the dessert category, losing its role as a dinner companion. Today, it is rarely remembered as anything other than a sweet treat, but once it was an important side that proved how flexibility in cooking helped families make the most of their resources. Pickled beets and eggs were once a pantry staple in rural households, bringing both color and nutrition to the family table. Hard-boiled eggs were stored in jars with beets, vinegar, sugar, and spices, creating a striking pink hue and tangy flavor. This dish was practical because it kept well without refrigeration, making it ideal for farm families or those with limited storage. The flavor was bold and unusual, with the eggs taking on the sweetness and acidity of the beet brine. Children often found them strange, but adults enjoyed their brightness as a change from plain sides. They were especially popular in Pennsylvania Dutch kitchens, where they carried cultural significance. The dish required little effort and used inexpensive ingredients, which was valuable during rationing years. Though rarely seen on tables now, pickled beets and eggs were once an essential reminder of frugality, resourcefulness, and the joy of adding color and flavor to otherwise simple meals during the mid-century years. Cottage cheese with canned peaches was once promoted as a health-conscious side, showing up in both school cafeterias and family dining rooms. A scoop of cottage cheese placed on a lettuce leaf topped with a peach half from a can was considered both attractive and nutritious. Housewives appreciated how quickly it could be prepared, requiring no cooking at all. It fit the mid-century belief in light, protein-rich meals, offering a break from heavier starchy sides. Children sometimes enjoyed the sweetness of the peaches, but were less convinced by the curds of cottage cheese. Still, the dish was embraced because it was affordable and widely adaptable. It appeared often in diet magazines and cookbooks of the 1970s, tied to ideas of eating healthy while still feeling indulgent. Today, cottage cheese with canned peaches has largely disappeared from family tables, replaced by modern health trends. But once, it stood as a proud example of how simple pairings could deliver both flavor and nutrition without straining household budgets. Celery stuffed with pimento cheese was a snack-like side dish that found a place in many mid-century homes. Crisp celery sticks were filled with creamy pimento cheese spread, creating a balance of crunch and richness. It was served at luncheons, picnics, and family dinners, often set out as part of the side spread rather than a starter. Housewives liked it because it was quick to prepare, colorful on the plate, and inexpensive, relying mostly on pantry staples. Children often grabbed these celery sticks without complaint, making them one of the easier ways to sneak vegetables into the meal. The pimento cheese filling could be homemade or store-bought, depending on resources, and was flexible enough to stretch over large gatherings. It represented the era's love of convenience foods that could still feel homemade. Though celery stuffed with pimento cheese has mostly disappeared, it once reflected the creativity of thrifty households, proving that even the simplest vegetables could become a beloved side dish with just a little imagination. Wild rice pilaf was once considered an exotic and special side dish, particularly in the Midwest where wild rice was harvested locally. The nutty flavor and chewy texture made it stand out compared to plain white rice. and it was often combined with mushrooms, onions, and broth. Pilaf was usually reserved for holidays, weddings, or Sunday dinners when something more refined was expected. Housewives appreciated that it looked elegant but was not overly complicated to prepare. Children often approached it with suspicion, unused to darker grains, but adults embraced its rich flavor and sense of novelty. As convenience rice products and boxed mixes grew in popularity, wild rice pilaf faded from everyday use. It became associated more with fine dining than family tables, losing its role as a celebratory household dish. Still, in the mid-century years, wild rice pilaf was a symbol of sophistication, showing how even modest kitchens could present something that felt worldly, special, and different from the daily routine of potatoes or bread. Creamed onions were once a standard Thanksgiving side dish, showing up on tables across the country during the holiday season. Pearl onions were boiled until tender, then coated in a rich white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk, sometimes finished with a sprinkle of nutmeg. The dish was warm, smooth, and comforting, offering a milder flavor that balanced stronger foods like turkey and stuffing. Families looked forward to it because it felt festive, appearing only during special occasions. Housewives valued it as a way to use inexpensive onions in a celebratory manner, transforming a humble vegetable into something elegant. Children might not have been enthusiastic, but they ate it because it was tradition. Over time, Thanksgiving menus expanded with new sides, and creamed onions quietly slipped away. Today, it is one of those dishes remembered by grandparents, but rarely prepared anymore. For much of the mid-century era, however, creamed onions held a place of honor on holiday tables, symbolizing warmth, tradition, and family togetherness during celebrations. Shoestring potato casserole was one of those dishes that could only have existed in the middle of the 20th century when canned potato sticks were considered both modern and exciting. Housewives layered the crunchy sticks over casseroles made with soups, vegetables, and scraps of meat, baking it all together until the top was golden and crisp. The texture was the main draw, offering a salty crunch that made even the plainest base taste special. Children often loved it because the topping reminded them of snack food, while adults appreciated that it disguised otherwise humble ingredients. It showed up at potlucks and church suppers, where its unusual crunch made it stand out among creamier sides. As fresh produce and homemade recipes reclaimed kitchens, the idea of topping casseroles with canned sticks fell out of favor. Today, the dish has virtually disappeared, remembered mostly in old cookbooks and family memories. Shoestring potato casserole was quirky, thrifty, and satisfying, proof of how creativity with convenience foods once defined the American family table. Pickled okra was a southern staple that once filled jars lined up on pantry shelves, ready to add tang and crunch to everyday meals. The pods were packed with vinegar, garlic, and spices, creating a side dish that balanced fried meats and heavy vegetables. Families served them straight from the jar, a sharp counterpoint to rich suppers that needed a lighter bite. Housewives valued them because okra grew easily and abundantly, making pickling a natural way to preserve the harvest. Children were divided, with some enjoying the unusual snap and others rejecting the sliminess of fresh okra. Pickled versions, however, were firmer and easier to enjoy. They traveled well to church picnics, Sunday lunches, and community gatherings, always adding a tangy burst to plates. Over time, changing tastes and the decline of home pickling left them behind. Today, pickled okra is rare outside specialty stores, but once it was a common and beloved addition that brought brightness and tradition to everyday Southern dining tables. Baked acorn squash rings were once a fall tradition that filled kitchens with the scent of butter and brown sugar. Housewives sliced the squat green squashes into rounds, scooped out the seeds, and baked them until tender, often adding a sweet glaze that caramelized in the oven. They were colorful and festive, appearing on holiday tables as a natural decoration as well as food. Families loved them because they felt like a special seasonal treat, bringing warmth to chilly autumn evenings. Children enjoyed the sweetness, which made the vegetable easier to eat than plainer greens. They were also practical since squash stored well through the winter and could be prepared without much effort. For many households, Baked acorn squash rings were an expected dish for Thanksgiving or Sunday dinners, tied to the rhythm of the seasons. Over the years, faster, creamier sides replaced them, and their careful preparation became less appealing. Yet they remain a nostalgic reminder of simpler holiday meals and the charm of seasonal cooking. Marinated artichoke hearts became a fashionable side dish in the 1970s, when the rise of Mediterranean flavors gave American tables something exotic. Housewives bought jars of artichokes packed in oil and herbs, serving them cold alongside roasts, pasta, or chicken. They looked elegant in glass dishes, offering a glossy sheen and unusual flavor compared to ordinary vegetables. For many families, they represented sophistication, the kind of food you might see in magazines and want to try at home. Children were often baffled by their taste, but adults embraced them as proof that everyday meals could feel cosmopolitan. They showed up at potlucks, dinner parties, and even holiday spreads, often combined with olives or cheese. The convenience of simply opening a jar made them especially attractive during busy years when families wanted flavor without fuss. Eventually, their novelty wore off, and marinated artichokes became less common outside specialty cooking. Still, for a time, they were a symbol of trendiness, showing how international foods could reshape the American side dish. Spinach soufflé was a side dish that felt refined, light, and a little intimidating for the average cook. It required careful preparation, folding whipped egg whites into spinach and cheese to create a fluffy, savory bake. Housewives who mastered it often served it proudly at Sunday dinners or dinner parties, knowing it was more impressive than ordinary vegetables. Families appreciated its airy texture, which turned spinach into something indulgent and elegant. Children might not have rushed toward it, but the creamy richness made it easier to eat than plain boiled greens. The dish reflected an era when time and patience were still part of cooking, long before convenience foods dominated. Recipes circulated in magazines and cookbooks, showcasing soufflés as signs of culinary skill. Yet as kitchens moved toward faster meals, delicate dishes like this faded away. Spinach soufflé now feels like a relic of an age when cooking itself was a performance, a reminder of the pride families once took in presenting sides as works of art. Carrot and raisin salad was a sweet, crunchy side that once graced potluck tables and school cafeterias across the country. Grated carrots were mixed with raisins, sometimes pineapple, and bound together with mayonnaise or a light dressing. The result was tangy, colorful, and refreshing, a side dish that walked the line between salad and dessert. Families liked it because it used inexpensive ingredients and could be prepared quickly with no cooking required. Children were often more willing to eat carrots when they were paired with sweet raisins, which made it a practical choice for parents. The salad also traveled well, making it a favorite for community gatherings and picnics. It symbolized mid-century dining habits, where dishes were expected to be both thrifty and cheerful. Over time, changing tastes made its sweetness seem odd next to savory mains, and it gradually disappeared from tables. Carrot and raisin salad is rarely made today, but for decades it represented the simple, homey balance of nutrition and comfort. Stewed rhubarb was once a spring and summer side dish that added tart brightness to otherwise heavy meals. Families harvested the tall red stalks from backyard gardens, slicing and simmering them with sugar until they softened into a tangy sauce. It was served warm or chilled, sometimes alongside meat dishes, but just as often spooned over bread or biscuits. The sharp flavor made it stand out, providing a contrast to the rich, fatty foods that dominated dinner tables. Housewives valued it as a seasonal staple that could be prepared quickly and stretched into several meals. Children found its tartness surprising, though a generous amount of sugar helped make it more appealing. Stewed rhubarb fit perfectly into a culture of seasonal eating when what grew in the garden dictated what was on the plate. Over time, rhubarb became tied mainly to pies and desserts, pushing stewed versions aside. Yet for many families, it was once an essential spring side dish that brought freshness and vitality to everyday suppers. Baked rice and raisins was a thrifty side dish that blurred the line between savory and sweet, offering families both comfort and frugality. Rice was baked with milk, sugar, and raisins, creating a lightly sweetened dish that could sit alongside meats as easily as it could finish a meal. Housewives liked it because it stretched inexpensive staples into something that felt satisfying and filling. It required little effort, yet it emerged from the oven warm and golden, with raisins adding bursts of sweetness. Children often looked forward to it because it tasted closer to dessert than vegetables. For adults, it was a versatile side that paired with pork or chicken just as well as it could stand on its own. The dish appeared frequently in community cookbooks, passed down as a dependable recipe for lean times. Over the years, as meals became more specialized, baked rice and raisins faded away. Still, it remains a symbol of mid-century thrift, proving that creativity could transform humble staples into family favorites. Cold asparagus with mayo dressing was once a springtime side dish that celebrated the short but abundant asparagus season. Spears were boiled until tender, chilled, and arranged neatly on plates with a spoonful of mayonnaise or sometimes a mustard dressing. The dish was simple but elegant, appearing at Easter dinners, luncheons, and family gatherings. Housewives valued it for its presentation, since the bright green stalks looked festive and fresh. It was also practical, because it could be prepared ahead of time and served cold, freeing up time for main dishes. Children often resisted asparagus, but the creamy dressing made it easier to swallow. Cold asparagus represented an era when vegetables were served plainly, highlighting their natural flavor rather than disguising them. As canned and frozen vegetables took over, dishes like this fell out of style, replaced by heavier casseroles and convenient sides. Once a sign of seasonal eating, cold asparagus with mayo dressing is now largely forgotten, remembered only in vintage cookbooks and family traditions. Cottage fries were thick potato slices pan-fried until golden, a side that once accompanied Sunday roasts and hearty family dinners. Unlike thin French fries, cottage fries were cut into rounds, giving them a rustic look and a hearty bite. They were cooked in cast-iron skillets, often in bacon drippings or leftover fat, which gave them rich flavor. Families loved them because they were simple, inexpensive, and satisfying, a guaranteed crowd pleaser that stretched a meal further. Children especially enjoyed their crisp edges and soft centers, making them one of the most popular ways to serve potatoes. They paired well with meats, gravies, or even just bread, adding comfort to the plate. Housewives valued their versatility since they required little more than potatoes and fat, both staples of mid-century kitchens. Over time, frozen fries and packaged potatoes replaced them, and cottage fries faded from everyday meals. Still, they were once a beloved tradition that turned the humble potato into something memorable and worth celebrating. Harvard beets were the kind of side dish you either loved with all your heart or politely pushed around the plate. But back in Grandma's day, they were something special. Tender beets, simmered in a glossy, sweet and sour sauce made of sugar, vinegar, and a touch of butter or cornstarch for thickness. Sometimes cloves or allspice were added, giving them a spiced holiday feel that filled the room the moment they hit the stove. These beets had a deep ruby color that practically glowed in the bowl, and they were often served warm alongside pot roast or meatloaf. You would see them at church suppers, family holidays, or just because someone had canned a good harvest. They were a lesson in thrift, too, stretching garden beets through the winter with just a few pantry ingredients. People used to say Harvard beets were named after the university, but no one ever really cared. What mattered was that they gave even humble root vegetables a bit of elegance and shine. These days, you are more likely to see beets roasted with goat cheese than nestled in a sticky glaze. Mock oyster casserole, also known as eggplant dressing, was one of those clever Depression-era recipes that made its way into old cookbooks and never fully disappeared. The name might raise a few eyebrows now, but the whole point was to create a rich, flavorful casserole that mimicked the texture and heartiness of oyster stuffing without needing expensive seafood. You would take cooked eggplant, breadcrumbs, onions, and herbs, bake it until golden on top, and serve it as a side dish at holiday dinners or Sunday suppers. It filled out the table, stretched garden produce, and made even the simplest meal feel just a little more complete. Back then, you could find recipes like this scribbled in the margins of faded cookbooks or passed along at church potlucks. People knew how to make do with what they had, and this casserole proved that even eggplant could stand in for something fancier. You might not find it on modern menus, but back then, eggplant dressing was a practical, comforting side that made every meal feel just a little more special. Green bean and egg salad was one of those quick, cold meals that filled plates fast and stretched what little food families had during tough times. You opened a can of green beans, sliced up some boiled eggs, tossed it all together with mayonnaise, and that was it. A little creamy, a little savory, and ready in under 10 minutes. It might not sound fancy today, but back then, this quick salad showed up at church potlucks, summer picnics, and weekday lunches when the pantry was running low. The eggs added protein, the beans filled you up, and the mayo brought it all together in a creamy, satisfying bite. Families leaned on recipes like this because they used simple ingredients that were always on hand and turned them into meals that kept everyone fed. You would find this one scribbled in old cookbooks, passed along by neighbors, or quietly tucked into Grandma's collection of quick meal fixes. It might be forgotten now, but for plenty of families back then, green bean and egg salad was a go-to plate that saved time, money, and groceries. Golden Glow salad was another brightly colored creation that turned up at nearly every church gathering or family potluck. It was made with orange-flavored gelatin mixed with grated carrots and crushed pineapple, a combination that blended sweetness with a touch of vegetable crunch. Housewives would prepare it in large molds or pans and slice it into cubes or wedges, sometimes topping it with whipped cream or a creamy dressing. The bright orange color made it visually striking, earning its name as it seemed to glow under the lights of buffet tables. It was sweet enough that children loved it, but the carrots gave it the illusion of being healthy. Families considered it a salad even though it leaned more toward dessert, because gelatin salads were a category all their own in that decade. Golden Glow salad showed how creative cooks could get with inexpensive pantry items, turning 3 simple ingredients into a memorable side dish. Though it rarely appears today, its place in 1970s potluck culture was nearly guaranteed. Spinach timbales were a dish that made vegetables feel like something grand. Grandma would mix cooked spinach with eggs, cream, and a handful of breadcrumbs, pour the mixture into small molds, and bake them until they puffed and set. The result was a delicate custard-like mound that held its shape and tasted rich and savory. It looked fancy, but was often made from leftovers or frozen spinach, which made it even more impressive. These little timballs were served warm with a drizzle of cheese sauce or gravy and were a regular part of dinner parties or special Sunday meals. They had that old-fashioned air of formality that came from caring about presentation, even when money was tight. Spinach timbales were quiet showstoppers, the kind of dish that made people stop and take note without saying a word. They are rarely seen today outside of vintage cookbooks or culinary schools, but for a time they were proof that vegetables could be elegant too. Maybe we would all eat more greens if they were served like this again. Celery Victor sounds like a recipe that came from a fancy hotel menu, but this marinated celery dish made its way into regular households thanks to those old cookbook collections in every drawer. It was as simple as boiling celery until tender, chilling it in broth or vinegar, and serving it up with herbs or hard-boiled eggs when you wanted to show off. You could find it at potlucks or holiday tables, dressed up to look fancier than it was. People back then knew how to stretch even the humblest ingredients into something worthy of company. Celery Victor turned plain celery into a crisp, tangy salad that felt like a proper side dish next to roasted meats or casseroles. It showed up in cookbooks throughout the 1930s and 40s, passed along at church suppers and family gatherings. Cold canned salmon salad was one of those quick, thrifty meals that turned an inexpensive pantry staple into a fast, protein-packed plate when groceries were running low. You flaked canned salmon into a bowl, stirred in mayonnaise, and chopped celery if you had it, and served it up cold. That was all there was to it. Fast, simple, and surprisingly satisfying when families needed something filling in a hurry. It might not sound exciting now, but back then, this recipe showed up in lunchboxes, on picnic tables, or tucked onto a dinner plate when meat was scarce and time was tight. The salmon added protein, the mayo brought it all together, and the celery gave it crunch if you were lucky enough to have some in the fridge. Families leaned on meals like this to stretch their groceries and keep everyone full without much effort. You would find cold-canned salmon salad scribbled onto old recipe cards, passed down by neighbors, or quietly tucked into Grandma's collection of forgotten quick meals. It might be overlooked now, but back then this was a reliable 10-minute fix when money was tight. Cauliflower au gratin was a side dish that brought comfort and richness to 1970s dinner tables. Cauliflower florets were steamed until tender, then smothered in a cream sauce heavy with cheese and baked beneath a topping of breadcrumbs. The result was a bubbling golden dish that gave the plain vegetable an entirely new identity. Families enjoyed it as a complement to roasts, chicken, or even pork chops because it added both substance and flavor. Housewives liked it because it could be assembled ahead and baked when needed, making it ideal for busy schedules. It was creamy, hearty, and indulgent, fitting perfectly into the casserole craze of the time. Children who might have resisted cauliflower on its own often enjoyed it baked under the cheese and crumb topping. Cauliflower au gratin proved that vegetables did not have to be boring, and that with enough butter and cheese they could become centerpieces of meals. Though it feels old-fashioned today, it once represented the height of comfort cooking in the 1970s. Cottage cheese salad was the quiet hero of mid-century potlucks and family suppers, even if no one talks about it much anymore. You would start with a scoop of plain cottage cheese, soft, tangy, and mild. Then fold in fruit like pineapple, sliced peaches, or even chopped tomatoes, depending on the occasion. Some versions leaned sweet with whipped cream or gelatin. Others stayed savory with cucumbers or chives. Either way, it was a refreshing, creamy dish that needed no cooking and very little prep. It was served chilled on a lettuce leaf or in a glass bowl, the kind that caught the sunlight just right. It might not have turned heads, but it always got eaten. Cottage cheese salad was something you made when you wanted to offer something light, simple, and just a little different. It was affordable, nutritious, and versatile, ideal for hot summers or holiday tables alike. Today, it has all but vanished, replaced by packaged sides or dressed-up grain salads. But those who remember it know how comforting that cool, creamy bite could be. Sometimes the quietest dishes are the hardest to forget. Sour cream noodle bake was the kind of creamy, carb-loaded side dish that quietly filled plates and bellies all across America, especially at mid-century potlucks and family dinners. You would boil up egg noodles, toss them with sour cream, butter, chives, and sometimes a little cheese, then bake the whole thing until warm and bubbling with golden edges. It was pure comfort food, straight from the faded pages of those old spiral-bound cookbooks that promised to stretch your groceries and still bring something hearty to the table. Sour cream noodle bake balanced creamy richness with just enough tang, making it a perfect side for roast chicken, pork chops, or fried meats when times were lean. Families leaned on recipes like this because it was affordable, filling, and easy to whip up with pantry staples, especially when grocery budgets were tight and every meal needed to count. You would find it at church dinners, neighborhood potlucks, or scribbled on index cards tucked in recipe boxes, quietly holding its place as a dependable, cozy side dish. It slipped off most menus today, but back then, it made every plate feel just a little more complete. Tomato and sugar. Open-faced sandwiches were one of those quirky summer snacks that showed up when gardens were full, money was tight, and lunch had to be quick and simple. You sliced a fresh tomato, buttered a piece of bread, sprinkled sugar over the top, and that was it. A little sweet, a little juicy, and ready in minutes. It sounds strange today, but back then, this was a familiar plate across farm towns and small kitchens all over America. The tomatoes were easy to grow, the bread stretched what you had, and the sugar turned it into a treat that brightened up long summer days. Families leaned on recipes like this when grocery lists were short and mealtime had to be stretched with what was already growing out back. You would find this simple snack scribbled in old cookbooks, passed around at neighborhood picnics, or taught to kids as one of their first kitchen lessons. It might seem forgotten now, But for plenty of folks back then, tomato and sugar sandwiches were a fast, filling reminder of how far a little garden and a little creativity could go. Frosted lime salad was a vivid green spectacle that lived on buffet tables and Sunday dinners throughout the decade. It began with lime-flavored gelatin, which was poured into molds and chilled until firm. On top of that shimmering green base, housewives would spread a frosting made of cream cheese blended with crushed pineapple. The result was a layered dish that was part dessert, part salad, and entirely a conversation starter. Guests marveled at its bold color and unusual combination of tangy, sweet, and creamy flavors. Children enjoyed the pineapple while adults admired the cool, refreshing texture. It was one of those recipes that fit perfectly into the gelatin craze of the 1970s, where even salads were expected to jiggle. Frosted lime salad carried an almost retro elegance, presented in rings, domes, or squares depending on the mold used. Though its popularity faded, it still embodies the playful experimentation of an era that valued novelty as much as taste. In its own quirky way, frosted lime salad reflected the 1970s at its brightest and boldest. Tomato aspic salad was one of those strange creations that could only have come from a time when gelatin ruled the kitchen. It was a savory molded dish, tomato juice thickened with unflavored gelatin, then loaded with chopped celery, olives, or green peppers, depending on what Grandma had on hand. The result? A firm, wobbly side dish served cold, usually cut into slices or cubes and placed proudly next to roast beef or deviled eggs. People either adored it or found it baffling, but no one forgot it. Tomato aspic was especially popular at luncheons, bridge clubs, and church picnics, where presentation mattered just as much as taste. It looked refined, in a retro sort of way, and was always served with a smile. The tangy, lightly spicy flavor made it oddly refreshing in the summertime, even if no one asked for seconds. Some recipes even added a dab of mayonnaise on top to finish the look. Today, tomato aspic is more often the butt of jokes than a dish on the menu. But for those who grew up with it, it brings back memories of glass dishes, ruffled tablecloths, and a different kind of dining pride. Cottage cheese Jell-O salad was one of those curious creations that somehow became a potluck staple all across America. It mixed creamy cottage cheese with lemon or lime gelatin, and if that was not bold enough, people often added celery, grated carrots, or pineapple chunks. You would walk into a family reunion or church dinner in the 1940s, and there it was, wobbling in all its glory next to fried chicken or meatloaf. People loved it because it looked presentable, stretched ingredients, and felt like something special during tight grocery budgets. You might not see it on modern tables, but back then, molded salads were more than a trend. They were pure kitchen creativity when you had to make do. This one came straight from old community cookbooks with curled pages and faded ink, the kind passed down through families who knew how to stretch every dollar. Hot milk cake. Slices with butter were a quick, sweet fix that turned leftover dessert into a satisfying breakfast or afternoon snack with hardly any effort. You sliced up leftover hot milk cake, toasted it gently or warmed it up, and slathered it with butter. That was it. 10 minutes or less, and you had a rich, soft, slightly sweet bite that kept everyone happy when groceries were tight and meals had to stretch. It sounds simple, but back then, this little treat was a kitchen staple, especially in homes that believed nothing should go to waste. The hot milk cake gave it sweetness, the butter added richness, and together they turned leftovers into something new and satisfying. You would find this recipe scribbled in old cookbooks, passed down through generations, or quietly shared between neighbors looking for ways to make every crumb count. It might be forgotten today, but for plenty of families back then, hot milk cake slices with butter were a warm, comforting reminder that even the smallest leftovers could be turned into something worth savoring. Avocado pineapple salad was one of those curious combinations that only the 1970s could have produced. Avocado halves were scooped and filled with pineapple chunks, then topped with a dollop of mayonnaise or sometimes cottage cheese. The result was a creamy, tangy, and slightly sweet side dish that looked exotic at potlucks and luncheons. Housewives appreciated it because avocados were gaining popularity and pineapple, whether canned or fresh, was inexpensive and readily available. The pairing of fruit with creamy dressings was a trend that defined the decade, and avocado-pineapple salad fit neatly into that mold. Guests were often intrigued by the unusual combination, and while some loved it, others hesitated at the blend of flavors. Still, it represented the playful experimentation of the time, when food was as much about presentation and novelty as it was about taste. Avocado-pineapple salad, though nearly lost today, stands as a snapshot of a decade that thrived on curiosity and creativity at the table. Ambrosia salad was not really a salad in the way we think of salads today. It was a dessert disguised as a side dish. Grandma would fold together canned mandarin oranges, crushed pineapple, shredded coconut, mini marshmallows, and whipped cream, sometimes with a spoonful of sour cream to give it balance. It was creamy, sweet, and just fancy enough to make it onto the holiday table next to the turkey or ham. For many families, this was a taste of celebration. Kids loved it for the marshmallows, adults appreciated the simplicity, and everyone agreed it belonged at every potluck. Ambrosia was the kind of thing that made it into every community cookbook. Easy to make, hard to mess up, and always a crowd pleaser. You could throw it together with pantry items, let it chill for a few hours, and it would hold up just fine. Some versions added maraschino cherries or pecans for a little extra flair. These days, you might see similar flavors in retro-themed desserts, but the original ambrosia has mostly disappeared from our tables. Maybe it was too sweet, too fluffy, or just too old-fashioned. Golden Glow carrot salad was one of those bright, zesty side dishes that added color and crunch to dinner tables, especially when meals were built around whatever you could grow or stretch from the pantry. You would take shredded carrots, mix them with lemon-flavored gelatin, and fold in crushed pineapple for sweetness, letting the whole thing set into a glossy, citrusy mold that practically glowed on the plate. It sounds unusual now, but back then, molded salads were a potluck favorite, and this one stood out for its bold color and refreshing bite. Families leaned on recipes like this because it was affordable, easy to throw together, and made even the humblest meals feel a little more special. Golden Glow carrot salad showed up at Sunday suppers, holiday spreads, and backyard picnics, sitting proudly next to roast chicken, casseroles, or fried pork chops. Its stretched ingredients added brightness to heavy plates and gave meals that cheerful, homemade touch. You hardly see it now, but once upon a time, this glowing salad was a quiet symbol of kitchen creativity and making do with simple, practical ingredients. Fried potatoes and onion skillet was a fast, hearty stovetop meal that showed up in countless kitchens when times were tough and bellies needed filling without much fuss or money. You would slice up potatoes, chop some onions, heat a little oil or butter in the skillet, and fry everything until golden and crispy. That was it. It sounds simple now, but back when groceries were scarce and time was short, this was a meal that worked. The potatoes filled everyone up, the onions added flavor, and the skillet turned humble pantry staples into something hot, hearty, and satisfying. Some folks added eggs, bacon, or herbs if they had them, but most kept it practical and affordable. You would find this recipe scribbled on old note cards, tucked into grandma's cookbooks, or passed down by word of mouth through generations of families who knew how to stretch every last ingredient. Fried potatoes and onions might seem forgotten today, but back then, it was a reliable fix for hungry families trying to make groceries last, keep dinner on the table, and survive the lean weeks when every meal counted just a little more. Cold beet borscht cups brought an unusual European influence into American kitchens of the 1970s. Beets were boiled, chilled, and pureed into a cold soup flavored with vinegar, dill, and sometimes sour cream. Instead of serving it in bowls, housewives poured it into small cups, offering it as a quirky side or appetizer. The vibrant magenta color made it striking, and its refreshing taste stood out at summer gatherings. While not everyone embraced its earthy flavor, those who did found it invigorating, especially when paired with bread or crackers. Cold beet borscht cups reflected the era's willingness to experiment with international dishes, even if they seemed unusual on American tables. They were considered refined in some circles, a nod to cosmopolitan tastes during a decade of culinary curiosity. For families, they offered variety and a sense of something different from the usual casseroles and gelatin salads. Today, they seem nearly forgotten, but they once represented the adventurous spirit of 1970s kitchens. Scalloped corn casserole was one of those cozy, golden-topped dishes that never needed a main course to shine. It started with sweet corn, fresh, canned, or creamed, mixed with milk, eggs, a bit of sugar, and crushed saltine crackers or breadcrumbs. Then it was baked until it set into a soft, custard-like center with a crispy, buttery top. This dish showed up at potlucks, funerals, holiday dinners, anywhere people came together and needed something warm and familiar. You did not need a lot of money to make it, just pantry staples and a steady oven. The smell alone was enough to call everyone to the table. Some versions had chopped peppers or bits of onion, others stayed simple and sweet. But no matter how you made it, it had the same purpose: comfort. Scalloped corn casserole made vegetables feel indulgent, like something you could take pride in bringing to a neighbor's house. It was the kind of dish that lived in handwritten notes and passed down recipes, not cookbooks with glossy photos. And somewhere along the way, it got pushed aside for flashier sides. But for those who remember, it will always be the taste of home. Sweet and sour red cabbage was the tangy side dish that anchored family dinners, potlucks, and Sunday suppers for decades. You would slice red cabbage, simmer it with vinegar, sugar, and maybe bacon or apples for extra richness, and let it cook down until tender and glossy. The result was sweet and sour braised cabbage with a deep color and a bright, tangy bite that balanced heavier meals like roast pork or fried sausage. It came from old-world cooking traditions brought by European immigrants and slipped into American cookbooks by the 1940s. Folks leaned on cabbage to stretch meals when times were tight, but they still wanted hearty, flavorful sides. Sweet and sour red cabbage earned its place at the table by turning basic ingredients into something special. You hardly see it today unless you are flipping through vintage cookbooks or dining in old-school German restaurants, but back then it was a dependable side that made plain meals feel brighter. Tomato aspic with shrimp garnish might be the ultimate example of how far gelatin molds could be pushed during the 1970s. Housewives would take tomato juice, mix it with unflavored gelatin, and let it set in ornate molds until it became a firm, jiggling centerpiece. On top of that shimmering red dome, cold shrimp would be arranged in neat patterns, often crowned with parsley for decoration. The dish was tangy, savory, and oddly refreshing, though the texture caught some people off guard. It was served cold as a side or appetizer, sometimes sliced into wedges like a cake. For potlucks and luncheons, tomato aspic stood out on the table because it looked unusual and sophisticated. It was the kind of dish that showed effort and creativity, even if guests approached it with caution. In an era that loved experimentation with molds, this savory gelatin became a conversation starter as much as a food. Though long gone from modern tables, it represents the quirky inventiveness of 1970s kitchens. Creamed celery was the quiet guest at the table. Never the centerpiece, but always welcome beside a roast or baked chicken. Celery might not sound exciting today, but back then it was a dependable staple, easy to grow and even easier to find at the corner grocer. Grandma would simmer sliced celery until just tender, then bathe it in a velvety white sauce made from milk, butter, and a dusting of flour. Sometimes she would add a splash of broth or a sprinkle of nutmeg to make it more elegant. It was soft, mild, and deeply nostalgic, food that asked nothing of you except to slow down and enjoy it. You would find creamed celery at Sunday suppers, Easter dinners, and any meal where someone wanted to show they cared. It was not flashy, but that was never the point. It reminded people of gentler times, of manners and matching dishes and sitting down to eat as a family. These days, celery is more likely to end up in juice or chopped raw into a salad. Cucumber and sour cream slaw was the kind of cool, crisp side dish that showed up quietly at family picnics, luncheons, and Sunday dinners long before store-bought coleslaw took over. It was simple to make, but packed the refreshing punch you wanted next to a hot, heavy meal. Thin cucumber slices were tossed in sour cream, vinegar, dill, and sometimes a little sugar, creating a creamy, tangy salad that balanced fried chicken, pork chops, or pot roast. This was a summertime favorite, straight from those old cookbooks where frugality ruled the kitchen. Folks needed side dishes that stretched ingredients but still made meals feel whole, especially when gardens overflowed with cucumbers. You would find this slaw chilling in glass bowls at potlucks and reunions, cooling everyone off after long days in stuffy kitchens. It is nearly forgotten now, but for decades, this creamy cucumber salad was the quiet hero of summer tables, showing how something simple like a cucumber and sour cream could make a meal feel complete. Which forgotten side dish would you bring back? Comment your pick, like the video, and subscribe for more vanished flavors.